A large portion of the Jewish nation has returned to its homeland, but the heart, soul, and mind of much of the Jewish nation are still in exile mode. This state of affairs must and will inevitably change. This is Torah Nation TV from Jerusalem, and we are speaking with the head of Machon Shilo, Rabbi David Bar-Hayim. Shalom, Rabbi Bar-Hayim.
Shalom.
In the first bracha before Kriyat Shema in the evening, we speak of Hashem opening the gates of heaven. To what does this refer?
We all know that there are no gates or windows or openings and tunnels in the heavens above us. Today we know this, but in ancient times this was not generally known. In fact, the usual astronomical model that all peoples worked with did involve precisely such an understanding. We find in the Talmud Bavli, Masechet Pesachim 94b, we find the following discussion. It relates here the opinions on the one hand of Chachmei Yisrael, the sages of the Jewish people, and on the other hand the wise men of the nations of the world. This is probably a reference to ancient Greek philosophers and perhaps mathematicians of that time. And it says as follows: Chachmei Yisrael Omerim, the sages of Am Yisrael, Hazal, say, Beyom, during the day, Hama mahalechet lemata min rakia. The sun travels beneath the sky. The sky was understood to be some kind of a dome which was stretched over the earth like a canopy, and this dome had a thickness to it. It was not something paper thin, it was of a certain thickness. Uvalayla lemala min rakia, and at night the sun travels above the dome, above the sky, which we'll explain in a moment. Chachmei umoth ha'olam omerim, whereas the wise men of the nations claim, Bayom hama mahalechet lemata min rakia. Yes, it is true, the sun travels under the sky during the daytime. That's why we can see it, because this dome, by the way, was understood to be entirely opaque, that is to say, blocked anything from vision that was above that dome. But at night, the sun travels below the earth. And interestingly, we find that Rabbi Yehuda Nasi is quoted here as saying, "V'nir'im divrehem midvarenu," and their opinion, their description of the astronomical reality seems more correct, more reasonable than our opinion. First of all, this very statement, before we continue, I should point out, this very statement of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, that their view, their opinion is more reasonable, seems more logical than ours, this proves that we are not discussing a matter of Torah. If we were discussing something which the Torah tells us, that something that is by definition part of our belief in the Torah, then of course Rabbi Yehuda Nasi would not come along and say their view is more correct than our view. Rather, we are discussing opinions based on observation, based on assumptions, certainly not based on what we would describe as a scientific method. This was not something that was known at that time, and they also had no way, they did not have the means to conduct the kinds of experiments that would prove the matter. So we're discussing matters of opinion. And the general opinion amongst the Jews at that time, according to this statement in the Gemara, is that the sun traveled under the sky, under the dome during the day, and above the dome during the nighttime. And what does this mean? We find clear descriptions of what this really means, how the reality was perceived in a number of different sources. And one good example is the lengthy description that we find in Sefer HaYashar of Rabbeinu Tam. This is a book of a collection of interpretations and halachic decisions of Rabbeinu Tam. And when he discusses this this sugya in the Gemara and Pesachim, as well as the other discussion, the sugya in the Gemara and Masechet Shabbat regarding Ben HaShemashot, that is to say, the line that separates day from night. In other words, how do we define night or day according to the Torah? Rabbeinu Tam there gives a very clear explanation of this view of the universe, of the sky above us. And he writes as follows. In the morning, as we know, the sun rises in the east. How exactly does this happen? The description of this event is as follows. There is a tunnel through that dome, through the sky, what's called rakia, which separates the earth, as it were, and the atmosphere above us, the air above us, from, shall we say, outer space, that which is beyond that dome. There is a tunnel which allows the sun to travel on the eastern side of this dome, to travel through this dome, and eventually appear at the end of that tunnel. And when we see it, or when it exits that tunnel, we see it in the morning rising, and that is sunrise. When the sun begins to, at the very beginning of its travel through this tunnel, at the very beginning of that tunnel, on the far side, so to speak, that is dawn. And when and as it moves through the tunnel towards the earth, as it were, the light increases. And when the sun appears at the end of that tunnel and actually exits that tunnel on our side of the dome, of the sky, that is sunrise. And exactly the same process is repeated on the western part of the sky in the evening. That is to say, the sun disappears from our view and enters that tunnel, another tunnel, which takes it through the dome, through the sky. And as the sun travels through that dome on the west, the light of the sun dissipates until it disappears altogether, which is of course when the sun leaves that tunnel altogether. And during the night, as described in the Gemara, as we just read, during the night the sun travels in the reverse direction, from the west towards the east, so that in the morning it again will be able to rise in the east. This is the view attributed to Chachmei Yisrael. The view attributed to Chachmei Umot HaOlam, as we said, probably referring to Greek philosophers, etc., does not disagree in many of those details. It disagrees only with regard to the question, what happens to the sun? Where does it go during the night when we don't see it? Is it above the dome, above the sky? They also understood that the sky consisted of some kind of a dome. But they said no, the earth, the sun rather, travels beneath the earth during the night. That is why we do not see it. And in the morning it appears, having made a full circle, it appears again on the eastern side of our earth. That is to say, the sun does not travel in two different opposite directions, first east to west and then west to east, but rather is constantly traveling in a east to west and then continuous circular motion back to the east. Again, these views, neither of these views, neither the one attributed to Chachmei Yisrael nor the one attributed to Chachmei Umot HaOlam, are based on scientific knowledge. We know today, of course, that both of these positions are entirely incorrect. But what is important to note is that in the ancient world it was the norm to understand the workings of the heavens in this manner, that there were tunnels through the sky, as we described, and that the entrance to these tunnels, there were gates. And this is exactly the reference that you refer to in the first bracha that is said before Kriyat Shema in the evening. When this bracha refers to Hashem being poteach she'arim, opening gates, it refers to the actual gates of these tunnels, gates and openings in the heavens, which allow the sun to come through, to pass through, to enter and to exit, as we described. This is the plain, straightforward meaning of this term.
Is it not possible to explain this term metaphorically?
There are, of course, people who would suggest that, and for obvious reasons, because this would immediately solve the problem, so to speak. if we have the nusach before us that speaks of openings and gates and windows in the skies and the heavens above us, and we know this is not true, this of course will bother many people, and with justification, because it doesn't seem to refer to what we know to be a true description of reality. Whereas if we describe it as a metaphor, as something not to be taken literally, then apparently we would have no problem at all. We would have no difficulty. The fact is, this is wishful thinking. This is true for many reasons, or one could prove this to be true from many different sources. I will mention here only one source. I have here the Perush of Rabbeinu Elazar Migramaiza Bal HaRokeach on the Sidur. Rabbeinu Elazar Migramaiza, Gramaiza is the city also known as Worms, which is the city in which Rashi was born and where he was active most of his life. And this is also the city in which Rabbeinu Elazar Migramaiza, who was several generations after Rashi, we're talking about 850 years ago, he wrote, amongst many other things, a lengthy, comprehensive commentary on the Sidur. The Nusach, the liturgy that he had before him, that he was used to, was what we call Nusach Ashkenaz. This is in fact one of the earliest and most precise records of Nusach Ashkenaz going back 800 years, and it's a very important book just for that reason. With reference to our discussion, he writes in the second volume on page Tau Mem Dara, that is 444, he discusses all the different prayers, morning, evening, Shabbat, Yom Tov, etc., etc., quite literally word for word. He describes every phrase, every word, and he writes regarding B'chokhmah Poteach She'arim, he writes explicitly, L'sof ha'olam, klapei chutz, at the end of the world, Yesh be'ovi harakia, there is in the thickness of the dome of the sky, dlatoth, there are openings, doors, uchlapei ha'olam halon katzar, there are openings, and there is a smaller and a larger opening, and he describes how the sun enters through the eastern gate and opening in the sky, and how it leaves through the opening in the evening, etc. This is all explicit in his commentary, and there's even a diagram which was in the manuscript, which purports to show how the opening and the sky works exactly. Without going into all the details, it is quite clear that Rabbeinu Elazar Migramaiza understood this matter in the most literal sense, not at all metaphoric sense. And there is no doubt that he is correct. It was never meant to be understood metaphorically. It refers to what was understood to be the reality. And today, of course, we know that this is not the reality. And this should not surprise us. The greatest astronomers of that time, and even much more recently, understood the universe and the heavens that we observe to have worked in a very different manner from what we know today to be the case. It pays to keep in mind that it was only 500 odd years ago, in the year 1543, according to the Christian calendar, when the great work by Copernicus was published just before his death. It wasn't published prior to that date because he was terrified of what the church might do to him if his views were known earlier. The famous book by Copernicus was published at that time, in which he claimed, and this was considered to be a very newfangled idea at the time, that the Earth was not at the center of the solar system. The sun did not revolve around the Earth, but rather that the sun is at the center of the solar system, and the Earth and the planets revolve around the sun. This was contested by many, not just people in the church. And this is, of course, what all astronomers, going back thousands of years, we can mention specifically Ptolemy. His model of the universe, of the solar system, does not have the sun at the center. It's not heliocentric, but rather has the Earth at the center. And this was also, for example, the understanding of the Rambam, and all people who were very skilled and well versed in astronomy, this is how they understood the reality, even though we know today this is entirely incorrect. And it was only later when other astronomers and scientists such as Kepler and others began to furnish more and more proof for this new understanding of Copernicus that it was finally accepted. And of course we know today this is the truth. So there cannot be any doubt that the understanding of the heavens, of the workings of the heavens of thousands of years ago, when this language of this baracha was formulated, there is no question that understanding was flawed. There is also no question that it is not part of the Torah system of knowledge. It is simply based on an opinion of many human beings in the past, which was eventually disproved, and this was the basis for the language of this baracha.
So what are we therefore to do today?
What I suggest to do, and what I in fact myself have been doing for many years, is as follows. We have to, I believe, omit these words Potheach She'arim, and we should and can say as follows: Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech ha'olam asher bidvaro ma'ariv ha'arovim, which refers to the fact that Hashem causes the day to end and the evening to follow. And then instead of saying B'chokhmah Potheach She'arim, we can simply go on to say B'chokhmah Meshaneh Itim, who in his wisdom causes the timeline of reality to flow as it does, from day to follow night, night to follow day, and for the heavens to work as they do, which is entirely correct. Every other reference, all other words in the baracha are entirely precise and describe what we know to be true, that Hashem created the universe and the way in which it works, and today we understand the workings of this universe more correctly, and we praise Hashem for His wisdom and His manifest glory in the workings of this universe, and we are not required to say things which we know to be untrue and which also not at all fundamental to the baracha. So those words, Potheach She'arim, can and should be omitted, and simply go on to the next phrase in the baracha, which is Meshaneh Itim, in which Hashem, it describes how Hashem causes the times and the hours, etc., to change from moment to moment, from hour to hour, and from day to day.
Thank you, Rabbi Bar-Hayim. We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. We would also like to suggest the following opportunity to our viewers. If you identify with Rabbi Bar-Hayim's message and would like to sponsor or dedicate a video interview with the rabbi in honor or memory of a loved one, if you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org.